Before we get started, we'd like to say thanks to our sponsor, Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. Plus, there are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Also, Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. Plus, you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. And it's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. In this episode, we delve into culture wars and how sometimes they can be internal, just as Bo discovers. Preparing a school project on her family history, our fearless Bo learns how complicated family roots can be. We take the journey with her to resolution and reveal our own cultural battlefields along the way. Hello and welcome back, everyone. Well, if you have ever researched your family history, this episode is for you, especially if that search revealed something unexpected. Our topic today is Mixed-ish episode 4, in which Rainbow Johnson undertakes an assignment to do a poster on her family's culture. She is so excited to explore both parts of her history, black and white, but when she brings it to her family for help, she learns the tough but exhilarating lesson that culture is what you make it.
That's right. And I have to begin, Tarana, here, everyone, by congratulating the writers of Mixed-ish for digesting this huge topic of family heritage in 22 minutes. It's something that is relevant to everyone. So interesting. I promise you'll see yourself in this episode, whether you're white, black, Asian, Latina, whatever. But every single one of these characters in this episode gets pulled into this examination of heritage in some way, and their varying reactions are so representative, and they reveal so much. Like Rainbow, I love this topic growing up and remember being obsessed with family stories. So this was back in the 90s when I really started getting excited about this, and this is way before 23andMe was the top Christmas gift to give, right? And Ancestry.com became one of the most brilliant content marketers on the planet. I was rummaging through photos relentlessly and interviewing my relatives, especially the elders in our family. This is really my roots as a journalist. These family histories I took down and have them scattered across random journals and tape recorders, like old tape recorders. I'm keeping them and treasuring them for my children. But for Rainbow, this inquiry, immediately sparks tension. Unfortunately, her question, she's so excited, the sweet thing. But then her questions ignite a blow up almost immediately between her mom Alicia and her aunt Dee Dee, whose sibling rivalry, as we know, as we watch this show, is on full display, but especially in this episode. Says, "Who made you the queen of all black things?" And Alicia asks, "Who made you the queen of all things black?" And Denise replies, "Your mama." And all roller coaster ride watching the sisters war over how they define their African American experience and heritage. On the flip side, Bo's same question to her father, Paul, this is the white side, and her grandfather, Harrison, it goes much more peacefully. They're all kumbaya, and they seem to have this shared understanding of their lineage. And she's able to fill out that side of the poster, her Scottish heritage, much easier. So, Shannon, I'll ask you, what was your experience with family heritage? Was it tense to discuss your family roots, or was it a peaceful experience?
Yeah, I think, I wouldn't call it peaceful by any means. I think that there was some, a little bit of, fear to say the wrong thing or to express the wrong thing or something when it came to just diving into all of this. But I think wanting to know my ethnicity and heritage came from a place of curiosity that I just didn't think one should have to be. You should have to grow up being curious about. You should just know these things about yourself, and it shouldn't, I think, somewhere it gets lost sometimes. And that's what I kind of felt like in my family. Like I had to do similar to you and just digging for these answers, and it wasn't just freely given to me. I had to keep digging for that. And you know, I just think everyone should be able to know that. Just like you go to school, you do these things. It's just the norm. Like know your know your family history, your lineage, your culture. Um, but as we know in the United States of America, it's much more complicated than that. So, you know, and you know, it's in ways it was similar to Bose, but except, you know, I would get pieces of that information as the years would go on, as I got older and I knew how to ask questions in different ways and dig deeper. But I was always just given what, as much as, you know, age appropriate or whatever. But I was you know, definitely always asking. And race was such an issue, I feel like, outside the home in our, you know, always with our family, that inside the home, we just wanted to be. So we just weren't like always, you know, in those conversations. But again, I think, you know, like you, I think that like fed into the career of like appreciating people's stories and being the producer and the interviewer and the just wanting to tell stories, and understanding that everyone's story is important and should be respected and validated, and experience, you know, is important. And so eventually, you know, I would you know, I'd get what I learned how to discuss all about it with my family. And and as you know, as we and my meaning my sisters, as we got older, we would learn more and embrace, I think as a family we'd embrace all aspects of our lineage. But you know, I feel like on my mom's side, white side, like white culture is just very much ingrained into the fabric of the United States. So white people don't often think about their heritage and ethnicity, but my mom has a very rich story to tell. um you know, and at least I had been fascinated with it. But again, like you just grow up white and it's just, oh, we're just you know, like we don't have to think about it. But her grandparents were German, spoke German, um and you know, came from Eastern Europe to Canada, where my grandfather was born, in Manitoba, and he spoke German as well. And he, you know, even as a Lutheran pastor, preached some of his sermons in German. And I've been like, I have not forgotten about those recordings, Mom, that I like, I've been asking for those for a while. She's been holding on to them. But, you know, and also just like the Lutheran denomination is very much ingrained into German culture, like followed by a lot of the German ethnicity. But yeah, and you know, my mom's maternal side, it was more English and sprinkles of other European countries in there as well. And this is what I would be told as I was growing up before ancestry.com. And you know, and you know, there were dabbles of cultural traditions kind of in food, but it was mostly surrounded around the church traditions and not upheld very much, like very consistently. Like not everyone is like, almost like if you left that church and that denomination, like you were leaving the culture. But it just was really mostly surrounded around church and the holidays and stuff like that. But I felt like my mom really wanted us to experience her upbringing, you know, the musicals, the movies, you know, what she grew up with. And again, you know, white culture in the United States tends to dilute any ethnic culture outside of whiteness. And I encourage people to look into that, into material around whiteness, because there are a lot of curriculums out there, and you might be surprised. I have lots of white friends who dive into it and are like, you know, awakened. So, but with my father's side and his heritage, it was very much about New York City, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, where his whole family was from. And I'd ask specific questions to see how much, you know, we knew about the generations before us. And his paternal side was from Trinidad and Tobago. My great grands, they moved to New York City around their early 20s. And then their son, my grandfather, would always tell me, we're West Indian, and he would even mention Nigerian, but it was always like, well, how do you know that? Again, before ancestry.com. But, somewhere he knew something. So it was just like, maybe we're guessing here, and we know West Africa, we know our history. And so, and then the maternal side, my Nana, her family was like, okay, we're from South Carolina, and we came up to New York, and many African Americans migrated from the South to escape post-slavery horrors. And, the Great Migration is something that should be, studied as a major part of the United States history. And a good book to read is The Warmth of Other Suns, The Epic Story of America's Great Migration by Isaac Wilkerson. We'll put that note in the show notes. But yeah, I mean, that was pretty much what I was told. And then later I was able to do Ancestry.com. We can talk about that. But so there was a lot of truth to what I was told, actually. But what about you?
Yeah. So
like, was it similar?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you know a ton. And so probably know.
I've been digging.
Yeah. And so that's interesting, because I wonder how much of that was motivated by being biracial.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Trying to put those pieces together and see how everyone relates to each other. And I think, maybe there's a subconscious of wanting to know, is there like how much were we related to each other, like in slavery times? Like, was there any of that going on? But according to my lineage, I mean, we were very like Europe to Midwest, like Illinois on the maternal side. And then obviously, the paternal side on my mom's side didn't come over till into the United States until around the 1920s or something like that, I think. It was pretty late, and they went to Illinois. So there is no, that I know of anyways, of the Southern slave heritage going on my mom's side. But then obviously, with my dad's side, we knew, the Caribbean has its own history from the transcontinental slave trade, of, cattle slavery going on. And then the South and South Carolina, we have that going on. So it's just like, okay, well, we know we were slaves. Don't know when, don't know what, any of the property we lived on or any of that. I wish I knew more. And I'm sure someone in the family somewhere might have something, but as far as I've gotten, that's about it. But I'm always fascinated to know more. And I mean, Ancestry.com, which I did about 2 years ago, I like how it updates, because as more people become part of it, you get a lot more information. And it turns out that my highest percentage is Nigerian, believe it or not. And the second is Germanic Europe, and then English. So there's, in Eastern Europe and Russian. And so there is a lot of truth. And then even in, what I love about it, talks regionally, like it shows the DNA in the United States that you come from. So mine's very much the South Carolina, the Carolinas, that side. My husband's was very much like Mississippi, like middle, America, and Alabama and that side. So those, if you look into the history of slavery, you realize how much, like, the times and the centuries that slaves were brought to each region of the United States. And so it's just interesting and fascinating, and there's still so much to learn. There's so much that we still all don't know. it's a lot.
Yeah. And I think mine was my interest in heritage and family histories, was, and genealogy, I guess, was definitely based in being mixed. A lot of it. Some of it was just because I was interested in coming of age stories. So I would sit and fantasize about these people, like what my great grandmother was like as a teenager. So then, of course, I knew that probably meant, she was a slave on my dad's side. And then on my mom's side, I didn't really know. But then, of course, when you think about the dichotomies between our families, and some of them were, some of it wasn't. But there were rural poor farmers on both sides of my family.
Mm-hmm.
That's why my white mother knows how to cook soul food just as well as my black auntie, because they were both this rural food tradition of came from the crop, whether it was in Oklahoma for my mother,
right,
or North Carolina for my dad's side of the family. So those similarities are there, but of course I couldn't imagine there being like this huge difference in the way they must have come up, the people who came before me and my family, just because of race. And so I think that's what really motivated me to look into it. But we didn't walk around our house talking about race all the time. Actually, we didn't. And that's why I think,
right,
people have to understand, like, we're not walking around obsessed with race. It's just that within America, people in your society, in your community start talking to you about what you are, you start looking into it. And I also didn't talk about race a lot in my family, but when I went to talk about roots and family histories, there was definitely some hesitancy on behalf of some of the family members, like, "Ooh, girl, don't go asking too many questions." That's generational. A lot of that was Black side, of course, it made me ask more questions. Then there was some stuff that was just made up, or myths that were passed down. But for years I grew up hearing about this Cherokee blood, this Native American blood I had on both sides of my family, especially my mom's side. There was this, I think it might be a myth, that there was a Native American squaw that my great grandfather had married or something like this. And so even just recently, I dressed my children in Native American garb for their, history day, because I couldn't pinpoint, like, what is your heritage for my children? I was like, what do I dress them as? Like, I don't. I knew I had some Northern European, I knew I had some West African, but like, this was actually before I did 23andMe. So I really only knew about this mythical Native American side of my family. And I say mythical because when I got that 23andMe test back, there was barely any Native American blood in that sample I gave. Questions for my mom on that, like, what's that about? I was trying to have, belong to this.
Which meant it was really far back.
Right. So that was an interesting discovery. And I was very proud to think that I had Native American blood. But anyhow, culture is both a question of bloodlines and tradition. And we see that so much in this Mixtus episode. So picking up with the, outline of this episode again, Paul and Harrison bond in the experience, a tradition category of, family histories. Paul and Harrison bond over hockey. This is their cultural tradition. And school, Santa Monica and Johan, who is hurt. They bond over this, and they try to bring Santa Monica and Johan into this this tradition. But Johan is hurt. He ends up being hurt when his Black friends tell him that hockey is a white sport and he should instead. Brings up some interesting questions. Of course, Dee Dee and Alicia square off over telling their side of the family history through this lens of Tennessee Black popular culture versus that of the African queens and kings that Alicia studied in her African studies. They go over magazines and TV history and books, trying to distill for Rainbow what African American heritage is. So do you have an opinion of whether heritage is more a lived experience or a bloodline? Was there anything, Shannon, that people told you couldn't be or like because of it didn't fit in with your culture? So to
these loaded questions. Yes. No, I think going back to just the bloodline or heritage. I think it's a bit of both, honestly. Like, you know, and it definitely depends on the culture. I mean, we see like in Jewish culture, you know, there's the Jewish race and then there's the Jewish faith, and it's like it's a whole thing. You know, we look at, you know, if you are Christian and, you know, going that deep with it, or but is you know, talking about African American specifically, I think, you know, we know that was something, the culture itself is created as to help us survive, you know, to help us survive slavery. The food, you know, being soul food, the music, gospel, jazz, hip hop, it's all therapeutic approach, and, you know, all derives from Africa, and oral tradition. And so, you know, it's I definitely feel like I've always felt something about, like, you know, a connection to the Caribbean. Like, I feel like in my blood that there is DNA, like, and it's been proven now that DNA, like, from, you know, centuries, like it is in our bloodline, like the experiences that we have, mental, emotional, it's not just, you know, health wise and diabetes and stuff like that. It's a whole lot of stuff. But you know, so I think it's all, you know, there's also the traditions, like, that people have in the heritage, and there is more, you know, some cultures are just have more in their, I think we were talking about this, like, we really are babies, like African American culture is still so young, like in terms of the world's culture in some respects. You know, like if you think of like Mexican Aztec culture, for some reason, I'm like studying this with my son. So just thinking about that, like, you know, how, and then, you know, different countries in Africa and how old they are. And just like, you know, I was thinking also when you were talking about that we're lucky that our kids have like the Smithsonian African American Museum in DC, like to just explore the culture. Like it's all about that, you know, it's not just one aspect, it's the whole culture, and to see it all together. um you know, so I think it's interesting. And, you know, there was definitely you know, this idea of like talking white, dressing white, you know, everyone could like label that in some way. Like if you're a black or brown person, like, you know, when it's like something that's white for some reason, like we know that, but white people don't know that, which is fascinating. Um, it's a whole thing. But it was funny because when Paul and his
Mainstream.
dad were like into this hockey, right? It's, yeah. When Paul and his dad were talking about hockey, I was like having flashbacks to my high school. I mean, we had a hockey, like Michigan. Okay, you got to think we're basically Canada, so like we had a hockey rink in my high school. Our hockey team was like state ranked, and it was a big deal. And of course, it was like, I remember there was maybe one black kid on the team, you know, and it was all white, and it's very, very Canuck, like, as they say, like it's very
What is
white.
Canuck? I've never heard that before.
It's like it's like this Canada, like upper peninsula of Michigan, like word that we use for the culture. It's just us Michiganders. But yeah, so it's yeah, I'm probably not even explaining that right,
It's
but
something for me to go Google. I love it.
it's very yeah, but I like the sport is like so violent. You know, like if you look at it, it's like just crazy. I mean, they literally like throw down their helmets and start punching each other in the face, and like it's just like very barbaric and very rawr, you know, like charged. It's just, it's a very interesting sport. So it was just funny to see Paul like put the jersey on, because that's not, I don't see him as that at all. um and yeah, it's just interesting. But there is a part of me that's like, yeah, I know exactly what that
Right,
culture is
but did
all
we
about.
stereotype Paul? That's us stereotyping Paul, right? Because I not the
Yes, he has these
so
layers.
I was just as
You're right. You're
guilty
right.
as Johan's friends who were telling him that hockey's white and you should like like I'm just as guilty, like, because I was like, oh, this is so interesting. This is juicy, getting past expectations and our assumptions about people. So again, that's why I love the show.
And, like I appreciated because I felt, well, New York, I just felt like has so much, there's just a lot of culture that comes out of New York. And my dad's family is just, they're musicians, like, and so music, jazz, like marching, like any brass band, like all the music is so ingrained into our family. And so playing an instrument was like gonna happen. Playing basketball was gonna happen. Like, like there's a lot of history. Like my dad has the history of Rucker Park in New York and like playing there, and he's, he like grew up with Spike Lee, like, on the side. Like, I mean, it's just, like I say, I keep going back to this New York culture, and I just will always like love New York. Obviously, I mean, it's its own, lifeline, so to speak. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's interesting how we've created like all of these little cultures within our United States of America.
So back to the episode, while Rainbow's mom and her aunt debate over how their family history, took shape, or what resent from that family history, that side of Bo's poster remains blank. She has to ask for an extension because the white side's all filled out, all nice and neat, all cute with pictures and examples, and then she's just blank over here. I've experienced that confusion too, mainly because with heritage on both sides of my family, it's just so diffuse sometimes. I was not sure before 23andMe where my dad's family was even from in Africa, and now I obviously it's from Western Africa, and on mom's side, Northern European. It also just felt very inconclusive. I was told for years we have this castle in our family, also probably a myth in Scotland, but these are like the little things that I know, which I'm like, that makes, like, is there a photo? Like, so I was kind of
no, there's no evidence in our Google
so I was kind of left to define it for myself, and that's been a lifelong journey, one that has stalled because I became a mom and had no time, and now I really need to jump back into it because my kids need to know better than I did. And that's what we see with Bo. We watch these adults in her life, her aunt and her mom, like have these fits and starts of how to explain this to her. And so then with Black School in Session, as Aunt Dee Dee calls it, Bo is able to come up with the right balance, because she concludes ultimately that culture is a shared experience, and that on the Black side, we make our own path and define culture as our own. And that's so true. That's so part of the survival story and the American story of Black Americans. That resolution is helped along by this beautiful truce between Alicia and Dee Dee, as Dee Dee confesses her resentment of her sister Alicia is not because she's not Black enough, which Alicia keeps saying. Why do you say that I'm not Black enough? Or that she's bougie, right? But she says it goes back to that she felt abandoned when Alicia got married to Paul and ran away to the commune and left her. And so then we see all this heritage talk fall away, and we just see two sisters in this heart issue that her sister Dee Dee has because she left her to go get married. And so that's also a really interesting thing in all of this, is that family is family is family. No matter how we, at the end of the day, define our heritage. And Paul have a heart-to-heart, and Johan exhales, right, as he accepts that he can like hockey and hoops. And then Bo's conclusion at the end is so beautiful. Beautiful writing here. Is so that instead of bearing a flag for one country or another to represent her heritage, she can craft her own quilt. And that's what she does on her side of the poster. Shannon, this reminds me of something I faced growing up mixed, which is that people always tell me we're all mixed in America. You're not special. And I always tried to say, first, I don't think I'm special, but my experience is definitely that of both elements. So if you feel like you can legitimately deny one parent or the other by marking one box on the census, you might be mixed, truly mixed, and have that experience in America. But but that's like the litmus test. I'm like thinking is if, that maybe we can have and hold out there for people if they really want to claim that they too are mixed, which again, we all are mixed. It goes down to experience here, and both is what we're trying to share here on the show, and what on this podcast, and what they definitely share in Mixed-ish, this duality of experience. So how do you confront that question when people say, oh, Shannon, everybody in America's mixed?
Well, yeah. I mean, we know that there has been mixing of races for a long time, but, I just feel the difference is that we, as our generation, the loving generation, again, there's this experience that we've had that we're able to voice ourselves and our identity instead of being silenced and forced into the social constructs of race and identity, and forced into being one or the other, and this one drop rule and the whole social construct of race. That it's bigger than that, and it is about our personal experience. And I'm coming to define, like, and we know this, I think, as Black people, is that we are a mix of people specifically, but that also means that white people are a mix of probably a little Black too. We're all related in some way. And again, going back to your experience and what you have been brought up with, it's very personal. Identity is very personal. Racial identity is very personal, and the experience of that. So, yeah. And I think, I know other people who are biracial who have grown up with one side over the other, and 9 times out of 10, they're still like identifying with the Black or brown side more because they're seen as that in society, or they are, if they're just raised with, say, the Black and brown side of their family, they don't even need to mention anything about the white side. They just like, there's just so many different varying stories out there. But it's to have, for example, my experience, where my parents are still married and living together, and I've always been with both of them. It's definitely my unique experience, and it's one that is always going to be biracial. It just is. And my kids, understand that, and they know that they are Black with this mix of, in their heritage of races and ethnicities, and that's what it is. Yeah.
All right. Well, now it's time for our mixed message of the day.
Hey, there's that backspin. So for today's mixed message, we're asking, how do you define culture? And tell us a time you looked into your family history and found something surprising. Please send us a DM and share with us through our website, mixedlifeatl.com, or find us on social media at mixedlifeatl. Make sure to tune in for next episode of Mixed-ish called All She Wants to Do Is Dance. I'm noticing the song title theme here the producers and writers did with their show titles, and I'm digging it. Well, that's our show for today. Until next time, stay safe and peace out. Mixed Life ATL is recorded in Atlanta, Georgia, and produced by SDB 360 LLC and Capacity Media. You can hear us wherever mainstream podcasts can be found. For information on how to advertise your business on this podcast, please message us at mixedlifeatl.com.